He was told to wait outside, without a name check. Without a question. Other guests walked straight in, offered water, welcomed with a smile. No one cared that he had built the very company hosting the event. He wasn't dressed like power. He didn't act entitled. And yet, he was the founder. The reason everyone was there. So who exactly decided who belonged, and who didn't? Before we dive into the full story, don't forget to like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more true life stories that need to be heard. Thank you. It was just past 8 a.m. when Marcus Wynn stepped through the glass doors of the Redwood Grand Hotel. The lobby was calm, sun catching the edge of polished tiles and freshly arranged orchids. Marcus wore a navy suit, unbranded but tailored, and carried a worn black briefcase with no logos, just fingerprints from years of use. He didn't walk with the crowd, didn't flash credentials. He simply smiled, nodded at a bellman, and approached the front desk. The receptionist glanced up briefly, then looked him over, then looked back down. "Please wait over there," she said, gesturing toward the lobby chairs. Marcus said nothing. He sat down, quiet, still, watching as guests in expensive shoes walked past him, into a conference he had spent 6 months preparing. What no one knew, not yet, was that he wasn't there to attend the meeting. He was the reason it existed. Marcus Wynn stepped into the marble-floored lobby of the Redwood Grand Hotel just after 8:30. He didn't arrive with an entourage or a polished name badge clipped to his blazer. Just him, in a dark navy suit, a worn leather briefcase in one hand, and a stillness in his posture that carried the weight of someone used to waiting. He had chosen this hotel for the annual Wynn Tech Investor Summit not because it was the flashiest, but because it claimed to know how to handle high-stakes guests with discretion and class. Behind the front desk, Kayla Benson was finishing up a phone call. Her nails clicked lightly on the counter, her eyes scanning a screen she barely looked up from. She was young, sharp-featured, with a sleek ponytail and a practiced smile she reserved only for those she believed were worth impressing. When Marcus stepped forward, offering a quiet, "Good morning," Kayla lifted her gaze, gave him a cursory glance, and waved her hand as if shooing a delivery driver. "You'll need to wait over there, sir. Lobby guests can't stand by the check-in area." She didn't ask for his name. Marcus paused, just for a second, not long enough for her to notice. Then he gave a gentle nod and walked to the seating area near the front windows. The cushions of the bench gave slightly beneath him as he sat. He placed his briefcase at his feet, pulled out his phone, and checked the agenda. Opening remarks at 9:15, followed by a closed-door session with European stakeholders. Everything had been orchestrated down to the minute. He should have been upstairs already, coordinating logistics. Instead, he sat beneath a chandelier whose reflection shimmered in the polished tile, watching hotel staff walk briskly past as if he were invisible. 2 young bellhops walked by with a cart of breakfast trays. One leaned toward the other. "Who's the guy by the windows?" "Dunno. Probably a driver waiting for someone. You know how they crowd in sometimes." Marcus heard them. He wasn't offended. Not anymore. He had heard versions of that his entire life, spoken with the same careless certainty, by people who never thought they were being rude. Just observant. He glanced at his watch. The leather strap had frayed at the edges. A gift from his daughter when his company first hit 1 million users. The clasp had been replaced twice. The glass face, though, was still crystal clear. There was a kind of irony he'd grown used to, that the more success he earned, the quieter it became in the eyes of those who judged worth based on looks alone. In some rooms, he was a name on a list. In others, not even that. His phone buzzed. A text from Jonathan, his assistant. "All vendors on site. Conference room fully prepped. You good?" Marcus replied with a single word, "Here." He looked up. People filtered in and out, all in motion. Some greeted each other with backslaps and jokes. Others adjusted ties, studied documents. No one looked at him twice. Across the room, Kayla stood behind the desk again, laughing lightly with a sharply dressed man who had just checked in. She offered him a bottle of water, a map of the facility, and a warm welcome. Marcus watched her lips move, watched her make him feel seen. The conference was happening under his name, in a hotel paid for by his company. But right now, he was just another face no one bothered to check. He leaned back, resting both hands on his knees. The sunlight through the window caught the scuffed edges of his shoes he'd bought 10 years ago. Right before his first pitch deck got laughed out of a venture meeting. Funny thing was, he'd worn the same shoes when he closed the billion-dollar round that brought him here. Marcus smiled quietly to himself. Sometimes the world needed a reminder. And sometimes, silence did the reminding better than words ever could. The elevator groaned softly as it climbed toward the 24th floor. Marcus stepped out into the dim hallway of his Mission Street apartment, greeted only by the low hum of the city through double-paned glass. He loosened his tie as he entered, dropped his keys in the ceramic bowl by the door, and walked straight to the kitchen. He moved quietly, filling the kettle and flipping the switch. The place was modest by most standards, but every corner held meaning. On the far wall, between framed photos of his daughter's first science fair and a newspaper clipping from the early days of Win Tech, sat a shelf lined with small glass trophies. They shimmered slightly in the morning light, each one a mile marker in a journey no one ever saw coming. Marcus rarely looked at them anymore. He poured hot water over the coffee grounds, letting the scent drift into the room. With the mug in his hand, he walked to the window and stared out across the skyline. The city looked different from up here. Not larger, but quieter, like everything made more sense when viewed from a distance. His phone buzzed on the table. A text from Naomi. "Dad, did you remember to wear your badge today? People should know you're the one running it." He smiled, letting the warmth of her message settle in his chest. She had always believed in announcing her father's worth to the world, even when he didn't. Especially when he didn't. He tapped out a reply. "I brought it. Didn't wear it." She responded a moment later. "Why not?" He didn't answer. Not right away. Instead, he sat down at the kitchen table, pulling the laminated conference itinerary from his briefcase. 6 months of planning, dozens of late-night emails, countless strategy calls, and yet this morning, he had chosen not to correct a receptionist who didn't bother to ask his name. He had let her wave him off like a service worker, and he had accepted it, without hesitation. Was it pride, or something else? Marcus traced his finger over the list of keynote sessions, all happening above him, in a hotel ballroom that now treated him like an outsider. He'd once been told, by a recruiter at a well-known firm, that he didn't fit the executive mold. The man had said it politely, with a smile, like offering weather advice. He'd said, "You're impressive, but we're looking for someone who makes VCs feel comfortable." He had nodded then, too, just like he had this morning. From his apartment window, Marcus could see the tops of delivery vans rolling down the avenue. One of them pulled up in front of the hotel. A familiar figure stepped out, Benji, a former intern who had stayed loyal through every phase of Win Tech. He wore a worn-out company jacket and carried a clipboard under one arm. Spotting Marcus on the sidewalk, Benji walked over with the kind of confidence only familiarity can offer. "Boss, you're early," he said, grinning. "They weren't expecting you till 9. Marcus smiled. "I figured I'd check things myself. Make sure we're being respected." Benji chuckled. Always the quiet scout. They talked for a moment longer, about cable placement, guest tech needs, the stubborn elevators. Then Benji headed inside, disappearing into the belly of the building that had just pushed Marcus to the margins. Back in his apartment, Marcus picked up his phone again. He opened the call list. His finger hovered over the name of Elaine, head of logistics. He could ask her to handle it, to send someone to smooth it over. Or he could make the call himself, demand the respect he had earned. But instead, he placed the phone down. It wasn't fear that stopped him. It was clarity. He had learned, again and again, that the most powerful statement wasn't always made with a raised voice. Sometimes, it came from refusing to explain yourself to people who never bothered to understand you in the first place. He took another sip of coffee. It had grown a little bitter, left sitting too long, but it was still warm. Outside, the city kept moving, and so would he. The lobby was livelier than it had been an hour ago. Rolling carts with glass pitchers clinked down the corridor. A whiteboard with investor names leaned against a velvet rope. Staff moved with the urgency of final prep, polishing surfaces, triple-checking name tags. Marcus remained in the same chair near the window, his briefcase still upright by his feet, his phone resting across one knee. The screen glowed with the conference agenda: keynote in 20 minutes. Coffee break in 40. Stakeholder roundtable by 11. But no one had come looking for him. Not a coordinator, not a hotel liaison, not even someone asking if he was in the right place. Kayla walked by again, holding a clipboard, glancing down at her printed list of VIP guests. Marcus looked up as she passed and spoke in a tone that was almost too soft to interrupt her pace. "Would you like me to confirm where I'm supposed to be?" Kayla didn't stop. She barely turned her head. "No need. We'll call you if we need anything. Just wait there, okay?" There was no malice in her voice. Only habit. That casual tone of someone used to brushing off men who look like they deliver equipment, not own companies. Marcus didn't correct her. He simply unlocked his phone and opened his secure business suite. 3 commands, typed quickly, with precision. His thumb hovered for half a second above the screen before pressing send. Pause all shipments. Terminate the service agreement with Redwood Grand. Relocate the entire conference to WinTech HQ. The messages left instantly, each one triggering a ripple across dozens of planning boards and coordination apps. Within seconds, Jonathan, his longtime assistant, received the alert with the CEO-level code confirmation. No context, just action. But Jonathan had been with Marcus long enough to know what silence meant in moments like this. Back in the lobby, a hotel employee struggled to hang a fresh directional banner pointing guests toward the WinTech Global Innovation Summit. It looked slightly crooked. Another team set out chilled water on silver trays. None of them knew the event was no longer happening. In an executive suite upstairs, the logistics team for the hotel was already noticing odd gaps. The coffee supplier had canceled. The tech crew hadn't arrived. A few guests had begun to check in asking whether the venue had changed, citing cryptic last-minute emails from WinTech. Downstairs, Marcus stood. He smoothed the front of his suit jacket and adjusted the strap of his briefcase. As he walked toward the main doors, he passed a housekeeping staff member pushing a cart of towels. Marcus nodded politely. "Morning," he said. She blinked, then smiled in return, surprised anyone had spoken to her kindly that morning. A ceiling camera caught that moment, just before Marcus reached the door and stepped out into the street. Inside, Kayla looked up from her screen and noticed the empty seat. For a second, she scanned the room, puzzled, but then she shrugged and went back to her checklist. In the hours that followed, the hotel's lobby became a maze of confusion. Coordinators began making panicked calls. Vendors were unreachable. Investors started arriving with puzzled expressions, holding emails that directed them to a new location 5 blocks away. By the time hotel management was looped in, the main ballroom had already been stripped of half its signage. Some staff were still unaware anything had changed. A few even continued laying out name badges. And Kayla, still at the front desk, refused to admit anything had gone wrong. But her fingers trembled slightly as she scrolled through her inbox. There, buried beneath updates and confirmations, was a message timestamped 20 minutes ago. Effective immediately. WinTech has withdrawn all event operations from Redwood Grand. She reread it twice, then 3 times. But by then, Marcus Wynn was long gone. And the chaos he left behind had only just begun. In the VIP conference room on the mezzanine level, Thomas Reed stood near the lectern, tapping his index finger lightly against a folder marked, WinTech Opening Remarks. He glanced at the clock, then at the empty seats slowly being filled by staff who didn't yet know that everything was falling apart. Thomas had been running events at Redwood Grand for nearly 15 years. He'd worked with heads of state, celebrities, foreign investors, even one prince who demanded lavender flown in from the Alps. Nothing surprised him anymore. Nothing rattled him, or so he thought. His phone rang, a number from the hotel's partnership desk. He answered with his usual calm professionalism. Thomas Reed. The voice on the other end didn't match the tone. It was sharp, fast, and unsure. "Thomas, we have a situation. WinTech just pulled out." Thomas blinked. "Excuse me? They've canceled the entire event. They've relocated everything. AV, catering, signage, guests, all of it." He stood very still. "That's not possible. We're less than an hour from check-in." "I know," the voice said, But their systems are locking us out. The vendor contracts have been voided. We just got formal notice. I think it's already happening." Thomas hung up without another word. He stood at the edge of the room as if the floor beneath him had tilted just slightly. Around him, 2 junior coordinators were arranging bottled water. Another tech ran checks on the microphone. No one knew. Within minutes, the cracks spread. One of the AV vendors called to say the crew had rerouted. A delivery truck carrying Wintex branded signage turned around mid-route. When Thomas tried to log into the event platform to verify guest arrivals, access was denied. His code had been disabled. Downstairs, the lobby began to shift in tone. An executive assistant arrived holding her phone, confused, and asked, "Is this not the right place? We got an email." Another man arrived moments later, suitcase in hand, and asked the same. Then 3 more. Thomas left the mezzanine and moved quickly to the staff office. He found Kayla standing behind her desk, frozen, her face pale. She didn't see him at first. Her eyes were locked on her computer screen. A video was playing, one she hadn't expected to see. A man in a dark suit, sitting quietly in the lobby. Then, walking out, no fanfare, no anger, just silence. Next to the video was the headline that was already climbing into the top trending topics. Tech founder silently cancels multi-million-dollar event after being dismissed by hotel staff. Beneath the headline, her own image appeared, her hand raised in a casual gesture as she told Marcus to wait over there. Kayla pressed a hand to her chest. Thomas stepped closer, his voice low. Who was that man?" Kayla didn't answer right away. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. A member of hotel security entered, holding a tablet. "Mr. Reed, we're being named directly on social media. They're calling it a public embarrassment. The tweets are getting traction. People are saying we ignored the founder of the company." Thomas tried to keep his voice level. "Founder?" The guard nodded. "Marcus Wynn. He owns Wynn Tech." It was him. Thomas didn't sit down. He didn't speak. His eyes narrowed slightly, like he was trying to read something invisible in the air. Then he simply said, "The man we had waiting in the lobby?" The room answered itself in silence. Outside the staff area, the lobby now buzzed with confusion. A few investors were trickling out with their suitcases. Others stood in groups, talking, checking their phones, sharing the same incredulous questions. "Where's Mr. Wynn? Why haven't they started? Is this some kind of stunt?" No one had answers. And without Marcus, no one had authority. Upstairs, the ballroom sat pristine and untouched, tables dressed, nameplates lined, AV cues ready, but it was hollow now. Everyone could feel it. For a moment, Thomas thought to reach for his phone, to call Marcus directly, to try to make it right. But something stopped him. It wasn't fear. It was the slow, creeping awareness that he had just let something important slip through his fingers. And no apology was going to undo it. 2 days had passed, but the echoes of what had happened at the Redwood Grand had not quieted. The headlines still rolled across screens, about a tech CEO dismissed in his own event space, about a hotel scrambling to explain, about a moment that had gone from unnoticed to unforgettable. Marcus didn't speak to the press. He didn't issue statements or appear on camera. He returned quietly to his office on the 12th floor of Wintex headquarters, a building whose walls he helped design, where every inch had been earned, not gifted. On his desk, a small stack of envelopes sat ready. They weren't marked urgent. They didn't come with branding or flourish. Just names, dates, and a quiet invitation to attend an internal roundtable on restructuring Wintex external partnerships. Each one was handwritten. One of those envelopes ended up in the hands of Thomas Reed. It was delivered in person, by Jonathan, who waited patiently in the lobby of the Redwood Grand until Thomas came down to meet him. The older man moved slower than usual, carrying the stiffness of someone who hadn't slept well since the headlines broke. Jonathan didn't offer excuses. He only handed over the envelope. "Mr. Wynn would like you to attend a closed discussion this Friday. It's not about blame," he said. "It's about hearing things we usually ignore." Thomas didn't open the envelope right away. He looked at Jonathan with an expression that mixed suspicion, regret, and a strange kind of relief. "He still wants to talk to me?" Jonathan gave a small smile. He believes people learn better from conversations than from consequences. Elsewhere, Kayla was spending her leave away from the spotlight. The hotel had taken her off the schedule indefinitely, officially for rest, unofficially for damage control. Her phone stayed mostly silent, except for the occasional buzz of forwarded articles or an old friend checking in to ask, "Was that really you?" She didn't reply to most of them. She spent her time in a small apartment over a sandwich shop in the Sunset District, watching the light shift across her kitchen tiles and wondering how something that felt so ordinary could ripple so wide. Then one afternoon, an email came. The subject line read, "A lesson no one teaches, if you're willing to hear it." The sender was Marcus Wynn. The body of the message held only one sentence. "Respect is a lifelong education, if you're still learning. I welcome you to join us." She read it once, then again. Then she closed the laptop without replying. But the next morning, she ironed a blouse, pulled her hair back, and boarded the early train to the city. In a modest conference room inside Wynn Tech, a dozen chairs circled a simple oak table. There were no nameplates, no photographers, no fanfare, just coffee, notebooks, and silence. Thomas sat near the end of the table, holding a pen he hadn't uncapped. Kayla walked in moments later, eyes scanning the room like someone entering a test she hadn't studied for. Then Marcus entered. He didn't come in flanked by assistants or with a script in hand. He simply took a seat like anyone else, nodded at those gathered, and began to speak. "When I was 27, he said, I tried to attend my first tech conference. I had a badge, credentials, everything in order, but security stopped me. Said vendors had to wait in a separate line. I told them I wasn't a vendor. They smiled and repeated the same thing. I waited, missed the morning session, never got in, and no one asked why. The room didn't move, even the air felt still. I'm not sharing that to earn sympathy." Marcus continued, "I'm sharing it because sometimes the lesson isn't what happens to you, it's how often it has to happen before people start recognizing the pattern." His gaze moved slowly around the room but never landed too long on anyone. Especially not Kayla. She shifted in her seat, her hands folded tighter than necessary. "This meeting isn't about punishment," Marcus said, "because punishment doesn't teach the right things. But conversations do, especially the hard ones." Thomas cleared his throat once but didn't speak. The man who had spent years commanding rooms now found his voice quieter than usual. And Kayla, who had come expecting defensiveness or bitterness, found none. What she found was worse. And better. A room that demanded nothing of her but honesty. The guilt didn't come from accusation. It came from grace. And that, she realized, was much harder to answer to. The mornings had begun to feel longer. Kayla sat by her small kitchen window, holding a mug that had long since gone cold. It had been 3 days since the meeting at Wynn Tech, yet she still hadn't replied to the follow-up email from Marcus's office. The offer was clear. A trial position in the customer experience department. She would not be managing. She would not be leading. She would be listening, taking calls, reading feedback, handling concerns from people who often felt ignored. Kayla stared at the screen again. Customer experience support, level 1. Part of her wanted to scoff. She had worked so hard to become a face at the front desk, to speak with ease and authority. She wore fitted suits, mastered email etiquette, studied presentation skills. She was on the path to managing teams, not answering phones. She thought of her degree, the internships, the hours rehearsing scripts of professionalism. This wasn't what she pictured. And yet, the memory of Marcus's eyes during that roundtable hadn't left her. He hadn't shamed her. He hadn't gloated. He simply told his story, and then listened to theirs. There had been no punishment, only an invitation. A soft one. One that required her to lay down the image she had built and pick up something humbler. It took her 3 more sleepless nights before she opened the response tab and typed 2 words. "I'll start." Meanwhile, Marcus was watching a different kind of conversation unfold. In the days since the incident, Wynn Tech had received dozens of messages from investors, partners, even public officials. Some praised the quiet dignity with which he had handled the situation. Others offered business opportunities. Among them was a proposal from Alira Events, a major conference company offering to take over all of Wynn Tech's future summits. Exclusive, scalable, safe. Marcus read the proposal twice. It was clean, well-structured, impressive in all the right ways. But something about it sat too neatly. That same afternoon, without telling anyone, he returned to the Redwood Grand. He didn't arrive in a company car or with an assistant. He wore a simple jacket and jeans, walked through the front door like any other guest, and asked for a glass of water at the bar. The staff had changed. A young man greeted him politely, offering him a menu and a smile that didn't strain. Marcus didn't mention his name. He didn't need to. He sat by the window where he'd once waited in silence, this time just observing. The lobby still gleamed. The staff still moved quickly. But for him, something was different. Or maybe he was different. That evening, back at headquarters, the leadership team gathered in a quiet conference room. Marcus placed 2 documents on the table. One from Alira, one from the Redwood Grand, an updated partnership proposal. Apologetic in tone, humble in its terms. He looked around the table, pausing just long enough for the room to still. "We've been offered safety," he said, "polished guarantees, strong resources, but we've also been offered a chance to help someone learn, to take part in something not yet polished." No one spoke for a moment. Then Jonathan, seated to Marcus's right, leaned forward. His tone was careful but clear. "Redemption," he said, "isn't efficient, but maybe that's not the point." Marcus nodded slowly, then turned back to the contracts. "What we choose says more about us than who we reject." The team sat in silence, the weight of the decision pressing gently, like a hand on the shoulder. And for a long while, no one moved to sign either page. Monday morning unfolded without pageantry. No banners flanked the glass entrance to Win Tech headquarters. No velvet ropes. No trays of champagne or flashes from waiting cameras. Yet the people came. Investors arrived in coats and cardigans, not tuxedos. Some took the elevator, others the stairs. They signed in at a modest reception desk, then found their way to the main conference hall on the 4th floor, following simple signs that said only, "Welcome." It was the same summit Marcus had once planned with grandeur, but this time, there was no music, no branded gifts, no distraction, just a quiet invitation to listen. The seats filled early. Every name on the list had RSVP'd, many with personal notes expressing gratitude. Word had spread, not just about the cancelled event at Redwood Grand, but about how Marcus had handled it, not with a public statement or a lawsuit, but with silence and a redirection of purpose. Inside the hall, the atmosphere felt expectant, but not tense. People spoke in low voices, exchanged cautious smiles. They knew they were not just attending a conference. They were witnessing something being put back into balance. When Marcus stepped onto the low wooden platform at the front of the room, there was no applause, only quiet. He didn't stand behind a podium. He didn't check notes. "I want to tell you a story," he began. His voice was even, without performance. "When I was 22, fresh out of college, I applied for a position at a company I admired. Big firm, smart people. I sent in my resume. Got a callback. Drove 6 hours to the interview." He paused. "But when I walked in, the receptionist didn't greet me. Just asked who I was there to deliver for. I told her I was the applicant. She looked surprised, then smiled and said, 'Of course.' But I never got to speak with anyone. No one came out. An hour later, someone told me they'd decided to go in a different direction." He looked up, slowly meeting the eyes of the audience. "They never saw my portfolio. They never asked a question. They didn't need to. They had decided who I was before I ever opened my mouth." He let the silence rest between them for a moment. "I didn't argue. I didn't write an op-ed. I just did the one thing I had control over. I kept working. And eventually, I built the kind of company I once hoped to join." He stepped slightly to the side, not as if stepping back from a spotlight, but as if making room for something else. "I'm not telling you this to earn your sympathy," he said. "I'm telling you because sometimes, what we think is professionalism is just polished prejudice. The world isn't short on talent. It's short on patience, on the willingness to wait one extra minute before judging." There was still no applause. But there was stillness. And in that stillness, Thomas Reed stood. His face was pale, lips pressed into a line. He didn't look at Marcus when he spoke. "We failed you," he said, his voice gravelly, "not just because of one mistake, but because we've built a system that feels normal doing that kind of thing. Somewhere near the back, someone coughed, then fell quiet again. But more than that, Thomas added, we failed the people who never got a second chance. Because most people don't get one. You gave us that, whether you meant to or not. He sat back down without waiting for a reply. A beat later, Kayla rose. She was at the edge of the crowd, almost hidden behind a pillar. Her steps toward the front were slow, uncertain. When she reached the open space near the stage, she didn't take the microphone. She simply looked at Marcus, and then at the room. I said things without thinking. I dismissed a man I didn't know. Because I thought I could tell who he was by looking. I thought I knew what professionalism looked like. I didn't. She turned to Marcus, her voice steadier now. Thank you for not making me small in return. Thank you for choosing to teach when you could have humiliated. I won't forget that. And with that, she bowed her head, not performative, but honest, and returned to her seat. The room didn't erupt in clapping. Instead, people began to rise quietly. A few pressed palms together. Others simply nodded. A wave of something more enduring than praise moved through them, something like respect. Marcus looked at his team seated near the front row. He gave them a nod, and Jonathan stepped forward with a folder. Before we end, Marcus said, I want to share one final decision. He held up 2 documents. Win Tech will be working with a new events team going forward. It's a small group, started by 3 people who were laid off from Redwood Grand. People who know what it means to be unseen, and who now have a chance to build something better. No fanfare, no branding, just a choice. The kind that says something, quietly, but forever. It had been 31 days since the summit at Win Tech. 31 quiet days where the media moved on. Headlines faded, and people returned to their lives with a little more pause in how they spoke and how they listened. Marcus had declined every interview request. He turned down podcast features, op-eds, and profile pieces. The only thing he agreed to attend was a small afternoon event in a modest conference center just off the Embarcadero, a showcase for college innovators pitching ideas to local investors. No press, no cameras, just students, folding chairs, and hope. He entered through the side entrance, wearing a navy windbreaker and worn dress shoes. No one recognized him. He preferred it that way. He took a seat in the second row, quiet, almost tucked behind a pillar. His name wasn't on the list. There was no spotlight. On stage, a young woman with cropped hair and a quiet voice stood in front of a projector screen that flickered slightly with age. Her slides were simple, but the conviction in her words made up for what the design lacked. She spoke about access, about building a digital learning platform for students who didn't have family support, financial backing, or the kind of background that made them look good on paper. She didn't smile often, but when she did, it landed with weight. Toward the end, her voice wavered, not from nerves, but from something closer to reverence. I don't have an MBA, she said. I don't come from a network of investors. I barely made it through sophomore year before everything almost fell apart. But one person believed in me. Someone I barely met. He once told me, don't let the way you look silence what you carry. She paused. I carry that every day. There were polite claps, a few murmurs. The next student rose and prepared their materials. Marcus remained still. He didn't wave. He didn't approach her afterward. He didn't need to. He had seen her name once before, years ago, on a scholarship application. A file flagged not for her grades, but for her essay, a letter to no one in particular about wanting to teach coding in neighborhoods that didn't have libraries. Back then, he had read it twice, and then quietly paid her tuition through the no titles needed fund. He didn't know what became of most of the students. That wasn't the point. The point was that someone saw them, even if just once, and chose to act. The event ended with leftover sandwiches and group selfies. Chairs scraped against the tile as people trickled out. Business cards were exchanged. Voices got louder, then thinner, until only a few stragglers remained. But one chair in the back remained untouched. On it lay a white card. No signature, just one line in handwritten script. For the one who chooses silence, when it matters the most. A janitor picked it up later, unsure if it was trash or tribute. He left it on the table by the door. Some things don't need to be explained. Some things are meant to linger. He never raised his voice, never pointed a finger, but when he stood, the entire system felt it. Not because of power, but because of how quietly he chose to use it. Maybe justice doesn't always shout. Maybe it just walks out the door and lets the silence do the rest. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a question, or even just a pause, subscribe to Undercover Truths for more stories that echo long after they end. Thank you for watching.